Putin threatens the world that blood will flow if Ukraine regains control over its border, while the Ukrainian army plans to sabotage the Paris summit, and the United Nations has finally recognized Crimea as Russia. But this is Stop Fake, the place where we break down Russian disinformation about Ukraine. So let's get to it. A few weeks ago, on December the 9th, Paris hosted a summit with the presidents of Ukraine, France, Germany, and Russia, called the Normandy For Meeting, which was started back in 2015 to bring about a political solution to Russia's war against Ukraine. A very concise roundup of Russian media responses to the summit is 0 results for Ukraine, a Donbas Srebrenica, and Putin is the winner. Generally, Russian media considered the Paris meeting as something positive for Russia, neutral or negative for the occupied Donbass, and a loss for Ukraine. Continuing the classic fake that the war in the East is a civil war and a purely internal conflict, Russian media declared that Ukraine has a lot of tense homework to do. Now that's a dig against Ukraine's President Zelensky, who many have portrayed as being young and inexperienced. Lenta.ru offered a summary that claimed although Ukraine may have made promises in Paris, it has no intention of keeping those promises, and the situation is just a continuation of Poroshenko's policies. Russian media are beginning to re-image President Zelensky as another villain, which is something to be expected. Radio Vesti claimed that Russia succeeded at the Paris meeting because the world has finally seen that Ukraine has no intention of abiding by the Minsk agreement, ostensibly designed to bring an end to Russia's war against Ukraine and Russia's occupation of Ukraine's eastern territories. Meanwhile, TASS declared that Kyiv is not focused on ending the conflict, but rather freezing it. Russian state television declared that the keys to peace in Ukraine are in Putin's hands, while the newspaper Vzglyad didn't mince words, declaring that Angela Merkel considered Putin to be the winner of the summit, and miraculously, only one Russian journalist actually heard her say this. Russian media also droned on about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's inexperience and lack of professionalism, accusing him of being beholden to the opinion of street radicals. Remember that repetition of a disinformation message makes it stick, and other media outlets are more likely to pick it up and amplify it. So, some Russian political analysts claim that Zelensky only learned what the Minsk agreement was when he arrived to the summit, and Ukraina.ru declared that an ass looking at its reflection in a puddle would be more optimistic than Zelensky did at the meeting's final press conference. Others compared Zelensky to a football that plays a passive role, conducted psychological analyses of his behavior at the final press conference, and announced that the Ukrainian president is afraid of Putin. So the picture that emerged after the summit is that Ukraine is inept and therefore dangerous, sort of like a kid holding a handgun. And to make that picture even scarier, a new boogeyman was launched by none other than Vladimir Putin, who threatened that if Ukraine regains control of its eastern border with Russia, a second Srebrenica will follow. Just before the start of the Paris meeting, ProKremlin Media launched another fake about an impending provocation the Ukrainian military was planning to sabotage the talks. The source for this fake story is, of course, anonymous. Apparently, an alleged contract Ukrainian soldier transmitted this impending provocation warning to the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic Prosecutor General's hotline. The other self-proclaimed republic, Donetsk, issued the same warning with the added claim that Ukraine was moving heavy military equipment closer to the contact line between Ukraine and the occupied territories. Anonymous sources and claims of Ukrainian provocations are a Kremlin media tried and true way of causing alarm and raising panic. Both have been in constant use since Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014. As we've seen, there were no provocations. The Paris meeting took place without any problems, and the Russian media declared Putin was the winner. Russia brought a member of Crimea's occupation authority to the 12th session of the United Nations Forum on Minority Issues held in Geneva last November and used his presence there to claim the United Nations recognized that Crimea is Russia. The claim is patently fake, as no such recognition has taken place, and is highly unlikely that it ever will, as the most recent UN resolution calls for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Crimea and an end to the occupation of the peninsula. Newsfront claims that Ruslan Balbek, a member of the Russian Duma from occupied Crimea, was allowed to speak at the forum, and after a victorious conclusion of his speech, the United Nations Hall burst into applause. The applause apparently meant that the UN has recognized Crimea as Russian. rubaltic.ru, and Russia's Channel 1 60 Minutes program anchor Olga Skabeyeva, also known as the Kremlin's chief female disinformation operative, echoed the fake by claiming that the applause was de facto recognition of Crimea. Other disinformation outlets claimed that Ukraine's delegation behaved barbarically during the session and completely angered the United Nations Forum leadership, who allegedly approached the Russian delegation on the sidelines and expressed words of support. The Best Fake Factory website, Ukraina.ru, cites Ruslan Balbek himself, who said Ukraine launched an ideological revolt and was angry because in Crimea there are no repressions and no oppression of minorities. TASS declared that Ukraine performed ritual post-Maidan dances, while Crimea News wrote that Ukrainians behaved with no restraint or culture, trying to interrupt Balbek's statement. All of this is an example of how Russian media carefully manipulate otherwise serious forums to distort reality, and the reality is that on March 27, 2014, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution number 68/262 on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, declaring the referendum held in Crimea in 2014 had no validity, and called on the international community and organizations not to recognize the annexation. In 2018, the UN passed a resolution again urging Russia to withdraw its military from Crimea and condemning the increase of Russian military in parts of the Black and Azov Seas. And just days ago, the UN passed yet another resolution calling on the Russian Federation to stop the militarization of Crimea, the illegal annexation of Ukraine's eastern regions and the Crimean Peninsula, and withdraw all military forces from Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian delegation participating at the UN forum, Russia circumvents these resolutions and parades its Crimean collaborators as representatives of the Russian Federation in an attempt to legitimize its occupation of a part of Ukrainian territory. That's it for this week. You can find much more dissected disinformation on our website, StopFake.org. Be vigilant, look out for fakes, and remember, if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, forward it to us for a truth autopsy. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.